Good morning, everyone, LinkedIn friends. Today, I want to talk about what might be the most insidious pattern I've seen happening across organizations of all sizes, and I call it the managed services trap. And before I get going, this is going to be a little bit different from the rest of the series in that we are talking about a trap in the managed services trap and a value first delivery manifesto. And instead of them having such a one-to-one like correlation, for me it's more about if you're an organization trying to change, right, you need to be aware of what's happening with managed services, and there's not much necessarily you can do to change yourselves if you're in one of those relationships. But the value first delivery manifesto, while it will benefit you in a lot of ways if you start deciding to deliver to your customers in a value first kind of way, it can also help you set expectations or see what's possible um, in terms of anybody that you're in a managed services contract with, starting to adjust expectations of that, partner or provider. Uh, so with that out of the way, let's dive in. Now, imagine you're looking at your company's budget and notice something troubling. The managed services line that started as a small investment for some, huge investment for a lot of people, started to help implement your digital systems has quietly grown into one of your largest expenses. What began as an effort to reduce complexity has somehow created more of it. And here's the hard truth: this isn't happening by accident, it's often by design. Let's take Sarah, a CIO at a mid sized manufacturer. 5 years after implementing several digital systems, she realized nearly 40% of her IT budget was going to managed services. Worse yet, the simplest of updates took weeks as tickets moved between different service providers who often blamed each other when things went wrong. When she asked about bringing some capabilities in house, her main vendor helpfully explained it would be too complex for her team to handle, while simultaneously proposing a contract expansion. Sarah says, "We hired these services to reduce complexity, but somehow we've ended up with more of it, and now we're dependent on external partners to manage it. The most frustrating part is how they position themselves as strategic partners while actively working to maintain our dependency." Now, across industries, organizations find themselves caught in the managed services trap, where the very solutions meant to simplify digital complexity deliberately create a spiraling dependency on external experts to manage systems that shouldn't be complex in the first place. The trap deepens through a predictable pattern. Organizations struggle with digital complexity, so they hire services to manage it. These services, often deliberately, create new dependencies, which require more services. Each layer adds cost without proportional value, creating a system that becomes increasingly inefficient and rigid. Most concerning is what happens to internal capabilities. As knowledge and control shift to external providers, organizations lose the very skills needed to drive their own transformation. They become less adaptable precisely when they need to be more so. And the vendors, they're incentivized to keep it that way. But what if there's another way? What if delivery could focus on creating transformation rather than maintaining dependency? What if the goal wasn't efficient service management, but enabled value creation? So when Sarah recognized the trap, she began a transformation. Instead of focusing on service management, she shifted to capability building. Rather than treating delivery as fulfillment of requirements, she reimagined it as enabling transformation. She found partners willing to treat knowledge transfer, education, training as a primary deliverable rather than a threat to their business model. 3 years later, her managed services costs had decreased by 35%, while speed of innovation had dramatically increased. The organization wasn't just consuming services, it was actively creating value, with partners serving as multipliers rather than managers. This transformation embodies the principles of what I call the Value First Delivery Manifesto, which reimagines delivery as a catalyst for transformation rather than a service to be managed or, dare I say, profited from. Today, I'll show you how to recognize this trap in your own organization where dependencies may be hiding and how they create unexpected constraints on your ability to transform. More importantly, I'll share practical approaches for breaking free, specific steps you can take to shift from dependency to capability, from complexity to clarity, from service management to value creation. Whether you're a leader trying to reduce mounting service costs, a delivery professional seeking to create more value, or a partner wanting more transformative client relationships while secretly trying to break free from those juicy profits that managed services can create. This session will help you recognize artificial constraints and illuminate natural paths to value. So, welcome to day 6 of our Value First Framework series. I'm Chris Carolan, and I'm so glad you've joined us today as we continue our journey from industrial age constraints to natural value flow. As you can see on our roadmap, we're now at the 6th station on the journey, right down here, managed services. Yesterday, we explored the qualification trap and the value first partner manifesto, looking at how traditional qualification approaches create unnecessary friction in relationship management. Tomorrow, we'll tackle the ERP trap and explore how the Value First Platform Manifesto creates infrastructure that enables natural value flow, rather than controlling it. But today, we're focusing on how organizations deliver value, exploring the tension between the managed services trap and the Value First Delivery Manifesto. And being honest, this is going to be my favorite session in the entire series. Um, if the qualification trap is the most pervasive trap, the managed services trap is the most insidious, often creating deliberate dependency that can cripple an organization's ability to transform. And at the end of the day, this is the whole goal of this series, is to help leaders and organizations transform on before AI really forces them to. Um, so let's dive deeper into this trap that so many organizations find themselves caught in without even realizing it until it's too late. So the managed services trap emerges as organizations try to cope with the mounting complexity created by their digital systems. What begins as a practical need for technical expertise evolves, often by deliberate design, into a spiraling dependency on external specialists to manage systems that shouldn't be complex in the first place. This trap has deep roots in how organizations approached technology adoption. In the early days of enterprise systems, technical expertise was genuinely scarce, making it reasonable to engage external specialists for implementation. But what started as project based engagements gradually evolved into ongoing managed services as systems grew more complex and integrated. Service providers quickly recognized that perpetual dependency was far more profitable than enabling client self sufficiency. And that right there, that statement is at the heart of why the HubSpot ecosystem and the product is different from everything else. Because at the end of the day, almost any client solution and relationship could and should, in my opinion, end with internal capabilities that can manage the HubSpot portal themselves. When we talk about no code and, um, you know, making development easier, uh, the way the portals are built easier, like it just goes so far to avoid this trap. Um, and Yeah, so let's look at Marcus's story. As the marketing director for a financial services firm, he initially hired an agency to implement their marketing automation platform. That made perfect sense. His team didn't have the technical expertise to set it up, but then they needed help with their ongoing campaigns, so they added managed services. When they wanted to integrate their CRM, they needed more support. Social media monitoring, another service layer. 5 years later, Marcus realized they had four different agencies managing interconnected parts of what should have been one unified marketing system. Every campaign now required coordinating multiple partners with each their own processes, timelines, and priorities, and project management systems you need to log into, et cetera, et cetera. When he asked about simplifying, each vendor explained why their specific domain was too specialized for his team to handle while proposing expanded services. It wasn't supposed to be this complicated, Marcus says. We outsourced to make things simpler, but now we spend more time managing relationships than we do actually marketing. The worst part? When I suggest bringing capabilities in house, our vendors act like I'm being unreasonable, as if permanent dependency is the only logical approach. The evolution accelerated as digital transformation initiatives proliferated. Organizations implemented CRMs, marketing automation, ERP systems, and analytics platforms, each adding new layers of complexity. Rather than questioning whether this complexity was necessary, companies typically responded by adding more managed services to handle it, creating a compounding problem. Service providers rarely suggested simplification when complexity justified their existence. And in case you missed the hug yesterday, the admin hug on Tuesday, rather, Matt Bolian always passionately speaks to this concept of 50%, failed CRM adoption. We all know the 70% number of failed digital transformation um, implementations. That's happening under this watch, under this managed services trap. Okay. That's how deep this goes. And I'm happy to chat with anybody that thinks that this is not a huge part of those numbers. As organizations scale their managed services relationships, the costs multiply in ways that often remain hidden until they become critical. See rising financial burden as services as service costs compound year over year, growing faster than actual value creation. Many organizations find managed services consuming 30 to 50% of their technology budgets without proportional returns. What begins as a reasonable expense becomes an ever expanding line item that gets harder to justify. Lengthening implementation timelines, as even simple changes must navigate multiple service providers' approval processes and handoff points. What should take days stretches into weeks or months, with each vendor protecting their domain rather than enabling rapid progress. Can I get this one field on this one screen in the ERP so we can start adding email addresses to our order confirmations? Hmm. Oh, it's gonna be a minute. Let's. Why do you need that? Let's discuss. We also see expanding coordination overhead as organizations must manage an increasingly complex network of vendors, contracts, and service level agreements, creating entire teams dedicated to vendor management rather than value creation. The irony is painful. Hiring services to reduce complexity often requires hiring more people just to manage those services. Mounting integration challenges. As different service providers work within their defined scopes, creating solutions that don't naturally connect with other systems or processes. Each vendor optimizes for their domain with little incentive to create seamless integration. This is why I'm so passionate about this, folks. This is what I do for a living right now, is helping with HubSpot integrations, because the vendors that have been doing it for years and have their own pre-built tools don't understand HubSpot. So if you go in there without somebody who understands the HubSpot data model, they're just going to build it like they always have. And it's not going to work out when you want that unified customer view. Lastly, we see growing knowledge fragmentation as critical understanding about systems and processes gets distributed across multiple external partners, with no single entity holding a comprehensive view. This deliberately created knowledge gap ensures ongoing dependency. Let's look at Elena's experience leading product development at a SaaS company. What used to be a 2-day process to update their customer onboarding flow now takes 3 weeks, because it requires coordinating with their UX agency, their development partner, and analytics service provider. Each has their own sprint cycles, priorities, and approval processes. The most frustrating part, Elena says, is that nobody sees the whole picture anymore. Each provider understands their piece, but nobody, including us, has a comprehensive view of how everything fits together. When I push for documentation and knowledge transfer, I get vague promises or complex materials clearly designed to reinforce the message that we need their ongoing help. It feels like they're deliberately keeping us dependent. I know that resonates with a lot of you. Hidden costs beyond the visible financial and operational impacts. Organizations suffer deeper costs that often go unrecognized and underappreciated. Innovation suppression. When service dependencies create barriers to experimentation and adaptation, new ideas face implementation delays, approval barriers, and integration challenges that discourage innovative thinking. The very partners meant to accelerate your business become gatekeepers, slowing it down. And what does that look like in practice? People stop asking for the things they need to help them with their job and help them serve customers. and they just keep copying and pasting. We see knowledge erosion as critical understanding about systems and processes migrates from their internal teams to external providers, leaving organizations increasingly unable to drive their own transformation. This knowledge gap isn't accidental, it's often deliberately maintained as a business strategy. Decision fragmentation. When authority gets distributed across multiple stakeholders with different incentives and perspectives, making aligned action increasingly difficult. Each service provider optimizes for their metrics rather than your overall success. Strategic constraint, as long term service contracts limit organizational flexibility and create barriers to fundamental transformation when necessary. Your ability to pivot becomes limited by vendor capabilities and willingness to adapt. We see a cultural impact as teams become accustomed to external dependency rather than internal capability building, creating a mindset of, oh, that's handled by our vendor, rather than we own this capability. This learned helplessness becomes embedded in your organizational DNA. Lastly, we see relationship deterioration as service arrangements that begin with high expectations gradually shift toward transactional management and growing dissatisfaction on both sides. The strategic partnership promised in sales pitches devolves into contract disputes and escalation calls. Take James, the CEO of a growing healthcare technology company, described how this affected their ability to innovate. We wanted to expand into a new market segment, but our service providers kept explaining why it wouldn't work with our current architecture. We didn't have enough internal knowledge to challenge their assumptions or explore alternatives. Our growth strategy became limited by our technology partners' vision rather than our own. When I suggested bringing more expertise in house, they warned about the risks and costs, while conveniently ignoring the ever increasing amounts we were already paying them. And what makes this trap particularly persistent is how organizations typically respond to the limitations of their managed services relationships. Instead of questioning the paradigm itself, they try to optimize within it. More rigorous vendor management that adds new layers of oversight, reporting, and governance without addressing the underlying dependency. This just creates more complexity to manage the complexity that was supposed to be managed for you. Maybe we need to update our SLAs. Are they getting back to us on time? Let's build a system to start tracking that better. Service consolidation that moves from multiple providers to a single partner, often trading multiple smaller dependencies for one larger one. This may simplify coordination, but often increases vulnerability and reduces leverage. Instead of key person risk, we've got key vendor risk. Rebidding and renegotiation that focuses on reducing costs rather than reimagining the fundamental relationship between organizations and service providers. You might get a better price, but you're still buying the same dependency. Internal PMOs that add yet another layer to coordinate between the organization and its service providers, creating more complexity rather than less. The irony of hiring more people to manage the people you hired to reduce the workload is often missed. Lastly, we see hybrid delivery models that attempt to blend internal and external resources without addressing the fundamental knowledge and capability gaps. Without deliberate knowledge transfer, these often reinforce rather than reduce dependency. These approaches share a common flaw. They try to optimize dependency management rather than building genuine capability and enabling natural value flow. They address symptoms rather than the underlying misalignment between how value naturally wants to flow and how managed service relationships typically work. And the service providers, they're happy to help you implement these solutions as long as they maintain the fundamental dependency that ensures their recurring revenue. So we see the pattern. This trap demonstrates how attempting to solve complexity with more complexity creates a downward spiral. Organizations seek external help to manage system complexity. This creates dependency on service providers. Dependencies lead to more complexity requiring more expertise. Each new layer adds cost and coordination overhead. Internal capability development stagnates. Knowledge and control shift to external partners. The entire ecosystem becomes increasingly rigid and expensive. This pattern reflects a fundamental misapplication of industrial thinking to digital transformation. We attempt to outsource complexity rather than addressing its root causes, creating elaborate service ecosystems that often generate more friction than value. What makes this so dangerous is how it becomes self reinforcing. As organizations lose capability, they become more dependent on services. As they become more dependent, they invest less in building capability. The gap widens until transformation becomes almost impossible without radical intervention. And let's be honest, while not every service provider deliberately creates dependency, the managed services business model inherently rewards it. A provider that truly enables client self sufficiency risks working itself out of a job unless it continuously delivers new value. Many find it easier to maintain dependency than to constantly innovate. But there is another way, a fundamental reimagining of how delivery creates value. Love this comment. I am web dev, but I do feel how we add more and more external tools to HubSpot for each single problem. Um, this is a huge part of the website conversation when it comes to, WordPress versus HubSpot or, um, any of those conversations. Like, just think about the ways that so many companies have been reliant on web developers just because each developer has their own code and we can't get anybody to replace them. They're the only ones that know how to add things to the form, to the website. It's one of the most common places for just dependency that is unnecessary. When you have lots of tools, not just HubSpot, that can give you great websites that do the job without all of the dependency and external sources. But um, it's not all bad for external uh, vendors and resources. This is what good looks like to me, at least. So the value first alternative, the core beliefs of the value first delivery manifesto um, and the manifesto itself offer a transformative alternative to the managed services trap. It's built on fundamental truths about how value naturally flows and multiplies. Number one, transformation over transaction. We believe delivery succeeds through impact rather than activity. True value comes not from efficiently managing services, but from enabling genuine transformation that creates lasting change for organizations and their customers. Number two, natural flow over artificial process. We recognize that value emerges continuously rather than through prescribed stages. Real impact happens when we create conditions that enable natural progression rather than forcing rigid handoffs and transitions that create friction. Number three, adaptation over adherence. We understand that effective delivery evolves with deepening understanding. The greatest value comes from remaining responsive to changing context rather than rigidly following predetermined paths that may lead away from maximum impact. Number four, capability over dependency. We believe sustainable value comes through building internal strength rather than external reliance. Organizations thrive when delivery focuses not just on immediate outcomes, but on developing the capability to drive ongoing transformation. And core belief number five, continuous learning over periodic review. We know that improvement happens through ongoing reflection rather than isolated evaluation. Real growth occurs when learning is integrated throughout delivery rather than relegated to after the fact reviews that come too late to enhance current work. So, we have 10 principles for the Value First Delivery Manifesto. In our pursuit of exceptional value realization, we commit to these principles. Number one, we will focus on outcome transformation, not just output completion. We recognize that delivery succeeds through impact. We will measure our success by the meaningful change created rather than simply checking off requirements or meeting specifications that may miss the deeper purpose. Uh, Quick wins checklist, anyone? Number two, we will enable natural value flow, not just manage handoffs. We understand that value emerges continuously. We will create seamless delivery experiences rather than enforcing rigid stage gates and transitions that interrupt natural progress and create friction. Number three, we will adapt to emerging needs and not just adhere to initial plans. We see these quick wins checklists again. We believe effective delivery evolves with understanding. We will remain responsive to changing contexts and insights rather than rigidly following predetermined paths that may lead away from maximum value. Number four, we will build on distinctive strengths, not just apply standard methods. We recognize that unique value comes through unique capabilities. We will shape delivery approaches around specific strengths and contexts rather than forcing all work through standardized methodologies that ignore valuable differences. Number five, we will create continuous learning, not just post delivery reviews. We understand that improvement happens through ongoing reflection. We will integrate real time learning throughout delivery rather than relegating insight to after the fact reviews that come too late to improve current work. Number six, we will enable transparent progress, not just status reporting. We believe visibility creates alignment and trust. We will provide clear insight into genuine advancement rather than producing polished status updates that may obscure actual conditions and challenges. Number seven, we will empower collaborative problem solving, not assign issue resolution. We recognize that challenges require diverse perspectives. We will bring together complementary insights to address delivery obstacles rather than isolating problem solving within specialized functions or escalation hierarchies. Number eight, we will make value tangible early, not just at completion. We understand that early realization builds momentum. We will structure delivery to create demonstrable value throughout the process rather than deferring all benefits until final handover. Number nine, we will enable sustainable adoption, not just initial implementation. We believe lasting impact requires genuine integration. We will focus on creating sustainable value realization rather than considering delivery complete upon technical implementation that may not translate to actual usage. HubSpot adoption gap, anyone? Number 10, we will multiply impact through pattern sharing, not just deliver isolated solutions. We recognize that value compounds through learning transfer. We will identify and share successful patterns across contexts rather than solving each challenge in isolation without capturing and multiplying insights. Now, these principles aren't abstract ideals. They're practical commitments that transform delivery from a dependency creating mechanism to a capability building engine. They create fundamentally they create a fundamentally different approach to how value is delivered and realized. Now let's explore how the value first delivery manifesto transforms progression through each stage of the value path. For audience members, saying, I am learning. Traditional delivery creates artificial complexity and jargon that often intimidates and confuses. It's as if some providers deliberately make things sound more complex than they are to justify their existence. Value first delivery provides clarity that enables natural understanding, making knowledge accessible without unnecessary barriers or specialized language. It demystifies rather than mystifies. When working with researchers saying, I am researching, traditional delivery restricts information to maintain dependency. Documentation is often sparse, vague, or deliberately complex. Value first delivery freely shares knowledge that enables deeper understanding, providing genuine transparency into approaches, methodologies, and outcomes. Nothing is hidden or obfuscated to maintain control. For hand raisers saying, I'm buying, traditional delivery pushes predefined solutions that may not fit actual needs, focusing on what's easiest to deliver rather than what creates the most value. Value first delivery enables collaborative exploration focused on genuine value creation, building initial capability rather than dependency from the first interaction. It's a partnership from day one. With our heroes, our highly empowered revenue opportunities, they're saying, I'm considering options, and traditional delivery emphasizes competitive advantages and unique selling points, often positioning proprietary approaches as the only viable solution. Value first delivery focuses on actual transformation potential, providing transparent insight into how different approaches create sustainable value. It's honest about trade offs rather than hiding them. For value creators, a first stage after the purchase, they're saying, I must create value for the org. Traditional delivery maintains knowledge barriers that ensure ongoing dependency, treating expertise as something to be guarded rather than shared. Value first delivery builds genuine capability alongside solution implementation, transferring expertise rather than guarding it. Every engagement becomes a capability multiplier. When supporting adopters, finally saying, I realize your value, traditional delivery focuses on upselling additional services, turning initial success into justification for expanded dependency. Value first delivery enables natural value expansion through capability development, helping organizations extend impact independently while evolving the partnership to focus on new value rather than maintaining existing systems. For advocates saying, I tell others about you, traditional delivery creates managed referral programs that commodify relationships rather than building genuine advocacy. Value first delivery enables natural advocacy through genuine transformation, creating shareable success patterns that multiply impact organically. People share because they've been genuinely transformed, not because they're incentivized. And for champions saying, I am a raving fan. Traditional delivery establishes customer reference programs that standardize and control advocacy rather than enabling genuine leadership. Value first delivery builds genuine communities of practice, enabling collaborative learning that transforms entire fields rather than just individual organizations. Champions emerge naturally from authentic transformation. The mindset shift from managing services to enabling transformation fundamentally changes how value flows through this natural progression. Rather than creating artificial dependencies that slow movement through these stages, value first delivery accelerates natural progression by building capability and enabling genuine transformation. This transformation is exactly what Sarah experienced when she shifted from managing services to enabling value creation. By focusing on capability building rather than service management, her organization moved more quickly from learning to researching, from considering to implementing, from adopting to advocating. Value began to flow naturally rather than fighting against artificial constraints, creating sustainable transformation rather than perpetual dependency. The result? Trusted, sustainable relationships that create more value for all involved, including the partners that have moved from managed services to managed partnerships. Clients gain capability rather than just services. Delivery teams create transformation rather than just fulfilling requirements. And organizations achieve sustainable growth together rather than temporary improvements. And remarkably, the best service providers actually benefit too, shifting from commoditized service management to high value transformation partnerships. Now, making this transformation from the managed services trap to value first delivery requires practical steps. Let's explore how to recognize this trap in your organization and take concrete action to break free. First, It's crucial to identify where the managed services trap exists in your organization. Look for these indicators. Financial indicators see rising service costs that grow faster than actual value creation. Budget allocation that's shifting increasingly towards the managed services. Growing percentage of technology spend going to external providers. Service expansion into areas previously handled internally. And contract renewals that increase scope without proportional value. Operational signals. Implementation delays that caused by service provider coordination. Knowledge gaps where internal teams can't explain how systems work. Decision bottlenecks requiring external approval or implementation. Multiple handoffs needed for relatively simple changes. And integration challenges between services managed by different providers. Look for these cultural symptoms. Learned helplessness, where teams automatically defer to external providers. Identity statements like, oh, we're not technical, or that's handled by our vendor. Resistance to ownership of systems or platforms. Diminishing curiosity about how technology actually works. And growing frustration with service relationships despite increasing investment. What about vendor signals? Might see resistance to knowledge transfer or capability building. Documentation that's sparse, overly complex, or incomplete. Language that emphasizes the complexity and risk of systems. Proposals that expand scope rather than simplify it. And warnings about the dangers of reducing service dependency. Take an honest assessment of your organization against these patterns. Where do you see these indicators appearing? Which areas show the strongest signals? And this recognition is the first crucial step in breaking free from the tech trap. First steps. Once you've recognized where the trap exists, here are specific steps to begin your transformation. Number one, conduct a dependency assessment. Map where critical knowledge exists primarily outside of your organization. I'd say do it inside of your organization too. Any key person or key vendor risk needs to be identified. Identify decision points that require external approval or implementation. Document integration challenges between different service providers. Analyze service spending patterns to identify areas of growing dependency. And evaluate capability gaps between internal teams and technology needs. Number two, reframe service relationships. Initiate honest conversations with key partners about moving from service to capability building. Review contracts to identify opportunities for outcome based rather than activity based arrangements. Implement explicit knowledge transfer requirements in all service engagements. Create collaborative learning structures between internal teams and external partners. And shift metrics from service levels to capability development and business impact. Number three, start building internal capability. Identify critical knowledge areas currently owned by service providers. Create dedicated learning paths for building internal expertise. Implement shadow programs where internal team members learn alongside service providers. Develop communities of practice around key technology domains. And create knowledge repositories that capture and share critical understanding. Number four, simplify and clarify. Audit current systems for unnecessary complexity Use AI to do this if you have to. It will tell you exactly what you need to know. Identify features and integrations that create maintenance burden without proportional value. Simplify integration patterns to reduce coordination requirements. Standardize core processes to decrease reliance on specialized knowledge. Consolidate redundant systems that fragment data and processes. Number 5, enable natural value flow. Identify where artificial handoffs create friction in delivery. Create direct communication channels between those with needs and those with implementation ability. Implement self service capabilities where appropriate. Reduce approval layers that don't add proportional value. And create transparency into actual progress and challenges. Remember, this transformation doesn't happen overnight. Start with the areas showing the strongest trap indicators and highest impact potential, then expand from there. And be prepared for resistance, both from providers who benefit from the current model and from internal teams accustomed to dependency. As you implement these changes, you'll likely encounter several common obstacles. Here's how to navigate them. Contract constraints. When existing service agreements create financial and operational barriers to change, start with relationship transformation within existing contracts. Focus initially on knowledge transfer and capability building, looking for flexibility within current agreements for pilot approaches. Plan for progressive transition as contracts come up for renewal, and consider investing in early termination where the long term benefits justify short term costs. Capability gaps. When internal teams lack the expertise to take ownership of previously outsourced areas, begin with high leverage knowledge areas that create disproportionate dependency. Create progressive learning paths rather than expecting immediate full capability. Partner with service providers explicitly focused on capability transfer, and implement hybrid approaches where internal and external resources collaborate during transition. Consider strategic hiring to accelerate capability development in critical areas. Of course, we're going to see resistance to change. When both internal teams and service providers resist evolving from dependency to capability, start with clear communication about why this transformation creates value for all parties. Focus initially on areas where pain points are already acknowledged, and create success stories that demonstrate the benefits of the new approach. Engage progressive service partners who see opportunity in evolving relationships, and address fear directly by showing how roles evolve rather than disappear. Resource limitations. When building internal capability requires investment while still maintaining existing services, begin with targeted investments in high leverage areas. Implement progressive transition rather than big bang change, and reallocate some current service spending toward capability building. Capture and share early value creation to justify further investment, and focus on total cost of ownership rather than immediate spending shifts. Service provider pushback. When vendors resist the shift from dependency to capability building, be prepared for FUD tactics: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They may emphasize risks, complexity, and potential failures of taking more ownership. Counter with clear data, specific capability building plans, and if necessary, find partners willing to support a different model. The best partners will see opportunity in helping you transform rather than maintaining your dependency. And all over this ecosystem, the partners you already have that you might have a managed services contract with might have entire business units dedicated to training and enabling people. And you just have to ask for it. Now, remember that overcoming these obstacles is part of the transformation process. Each challenge you navigate builds organizational muscle for the next step in your journey. How do you know if your transformation is working? Look for these key indicators that show you're breaking free from the managed services trap. Financial transformation. Service spending stabilizes after years of continuous growth. Value cost ratio improves as measured by business outcomes per dollar spent. Investment shifts from external services to internal capability building. Contract structures evolve from activity based to outcome based. And total cost of ownership decreases for key technology areas. Capability evolution. Knowledge transfer accelerates from service providers to internal teams. Decision speed increases as internal capability reduces external dependencies. Decision speed, folks, you need it now more than ever as AI continues to blast forward. Implementation timelines shrink for changes and enhancements. Self-service capability grows in previously provider-dependent areas. Internal communities of practice flourish around key technology domains. Relationship transformation. Partners evolve from service management to collaborative value creation. So many of them want to make this change and maybe have even suggested it in the past, and you couldn't fathom it. Let them do it. They can help you make this transition. Communication shifts from status reporting to transparent progress sharing. Problem solving becomes collaborative rather than escalation driven. Focus moves from contract compliance to shared outcome achievement. And trust deepens between internal teams and external partners. Value realization. We see business impact increases as delivery focuses on transformation rather than transaction. Innovation accelerates as implementation barriers decrease. Adoption improves for new capabilities and enhancements. Pattern sharing multiplies impact across different contexts. And organizational adaptability grows as dependency decreases. And again, you need that adaptability so much right now. This is one of the ways you can get there. Track these indicators to validate your progress and identify areas needing additional focus as you continue your transformation journey. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, and thanks to anyone who has stuck with me. This is definitely the longest episode. Not surprising. And we just had to explore. We had to go there. The tension between the managed services trap and the value first delivery manifesto. Let me summarize the key insights we've discovered. The managed services trap emerges when organizations attempt to outsource complexity rather than address its root causes. What begins as a practical need for expertise evolves, often by deliberate design, into spiraling dependency, where organizations lose the very capabilities they need to drive their own transformation. The Value First Delivery Manifesto offers a transformative alternative, focusing on outcome transformation rather than output completion, enabling natural value flow rather than managing handoffs, and building capability rather than dependency. This approach doesn't just deliver better short term results, it creates the conditions for sustainable transformation and growth. Breaking free from this trap requires recognizing where dependencies exist in your organization, reframing service relationships, building internal capability, simplifying systems, and enabling natural value flow. While obstacles will emerge, they can be navigated through progressive transformation that creates early wins while building toward long term success. What can you do tomorrow to begin this transformation? Maybe you're so excited you can do it today. Here are specific actions to consider. Map one area where your organization shows signs of the managed services trap. Identify three critical knowledge domains currently residing primarily with external partners. Start honest conversations with one key service provider about evolving toward capability building. They probably want to have that conversation with you, anyways. Create an internal knowledge transfer process for a high impact area. Or audit one system for unnecessary complexity that creates service dependency. And so much of what I've learned from working with AI is that the one thing it's not going to have time for is unnecessary complexity. Use it to help you find it, use it to help you transition and transform your company away from it, or it will be forced upon you. And good luck surviving that transformation if you have so much dependency. To go deeper on your transformation journey, reflect on these questions. Where do we see the most significant service dependencies in our organization? Which internal capability gaps create the most strategic constraints? How might our service relationships evolve to focus more on capability building? What unnecessary complexity exists in our current systems and processes? Where do we see the biggest opportunities for natural value flow? Tomorrow, we'll continue our journey by exploring the ERP trap and the value first platform manifesto, looking at how traditional approaches to enterprise systems often fight against natural value flow and how alternative approaches can create infrastructure that enables rather than restricts. I invite you to share your experiences with the managed services trap in the comments. Where have you seen this pattern in your organization? What steps have you taken to break free? Your insights might help others recognize and address this trap in their own contexts. Thank you for joining today's session. I look forward to continuing our exploration of the Value First framework tomorrow as we build a community of practice around enabling natural value flow in a world of artificial constraints. Have a great day, everybody.